Okay, so Carol's private lesson with River. Before we look at the video, do you have any questions or anything top of mind that you want to discuss?
Well, yeah, I have no aspirations to, compete or anything. My deal is just get back riding, keep him healthy, get him healthy. He had a terrible fall the first year I got him. He was galloping around and the ground was real hard and it was wet. And he just took this sliding stop on his side on his right shoulder.
Mm.
And before I got him, uh, two animal communicators have said that he has gone over backwards. He has a lump on probably maybe T16, 17,
Mm.
but it doesn't palpate sore. It's not, he never seems to have it bother him. But he's a funny guy. He was very unwilling. That's why he was placed after he was rescued by the first guy that rescued him, that he just couldn't do anything with him. He was very social. Loves to be around people, initiates contact, but it's like, no, I'm not doing that. You're asking me? I'm not
Yeah.
doing that. And it was very difficult just to get him to walk on a halter. It was like, working with a cruise ship that was stalled in the ocean.
Yeah.
And he's a big horse. So
Yeah.
I just want to make sure that what I do with him, keeps him sound. Oh, and he found her too in 2018.
Okay.
And he was off for about a year, but he's recovered really, really well. He's never had shoes on and he's a Mustang. So thankfully,
No, and horses with those kind of issues, sometimes it's just a natural tendency of the individual horse, but sometimes, well, almost always when they have issues related to discomfort in motion, they'll resort to what's called the fight defensive response or the fight defensive strategy. And it doesn't mean they're necessarily aggressive, but what they've learned is that pushing back, pushing against, going towards the stimulus is basically a good offense is the best defense. And they lack forward movement because they're uncomfortable, but that just builds the resistance. And you're the perfect person to be working with a horse like that because those horses mostly trigger the human fight instinct. And so it really becomes a terrible cycle where the more we fight with horses like that, the better they get at fighting and the more determined they become at fighting. So if he had gotten to the point where it was like difficult to even lead him, that's a pretty, moderate to extreme version of the fight defensiveness.
Oh, yeah. And the woman that I got him from, I'm the third person that's had him. I got him when he was 6, so I've had him 6 years now. Said that he'd only been ridden 5 or 6 times, which is probably good, except for the fact that the guy that was working with him was fired after, and very little detail about what actually happened. So I don't know, but he's got some PTSD on some stuff, and I think that's a perfect description. It's the fight response at a very passive level. It's just like,
well, and what's important to remember that as you're working, because as soon as you go to challenge his physical balance, that just describes his go-to MO to defend himself. And with the injury around, what did you say, T15, T16?
Yeah, I think it's
that can either be like that bump can either be calcification from a saddle rubbing, like the back of a saddle, Western saddle especially, or it can be from flipping over and kind of hitting that spot. It's just kind of at the back of the saddle, if it's a long saddle, or it's just behind the saddle. So he could have just had a painful saddle on, an ill-fitting saddle, a rider who was super heavy in their seat, or he could have flipped over. But that he'll be extremely protective when you go to change his back muscles. And with a shoulder injury too, getting him to control his body weight is the only way to recover the shoulder. But it's going to be delicate. And the thing to really watch with him is any horse that uses the fight defensive strategy. We have to be particularly patient and negotiable, which you are naturally, right? That's why I say you're the perfect person for him, because you're not going to back down. You're not going to let him bully you. But at the same time, because that can perpetuate the fight defensiveness. If we actually let them bully us, it makes them more insecure. But we have to be able to sort of hold our ground or stick to our objective without pushing back, without ever becoming the aggressor or the one who goes towards them. So it's really important to let them express their opinion and to use your mind to sort of find a way in where he can say yes instead of no. And that's true whether you're doing groundwork or riding, but particularly when we start to monkey with his balance under saddle, that's where you're most likely going to get that defensiveness coming back up to the surface. So, and it's normal because he's going to be super protective about his body. So the timing and the feel and the strategies of getting him to improve his balance have to include not giving ground, but not pushing back. So in other words, in the saddle, if you're giving a leg aid and he sort of like lifts his head, drops his back, and even takes a step backwards against your leg aid, the trick with that kind of horse is don't get harder. Don't give up, but don't get harder. So with a fight horse, you're trying to increase distance, which can be the timing of your aids. Or it could just be patience. So as soon as you're clear, it might take him 10 seconds to respond, or he might respond going against your aids at first. But if you kind of hang in there, so to speak, you don't back off, but you don't get harder and stronger, that's how you kind of get through that defensive pattern.
He is so much better. He's so much lighter to the leg now.
Great.
Which is really, really nice. So
yeah, and he's the kind of horse where like in the group, Pat has a horse, Shaggy, who's sort of similar. And the idea of finding balance internally can be done without too much direction, like steering or speed adjustments or things like that. So it might be interesting for you to play with him in that way. And we'll see, but we'll look at the video. But that's just something, especially a Mustang, especially a horse that got passed around before he was 6, especially a horse that had very little riding hours on him. All of that speaks to a chronic defensiveness that I'm sure you've worked through for the largest part, but don't be surprised if it rears up again when you get into the deeper changes with him physically.
He wasn't a wild caught. He was born in captivity, but his mom. So yeah, so he didn't go through that experience. So.
Okay. All right. So any other questions before we look at video? Okay.
Let's see what you think.
Whoops. And I'm not sure. I think I have these in order.
I think the short one.
Can you see the screen?
If you move your, there it is. Yeah.
Okay. So I have River and River Rides Again as the two titles.
This is the short one. It's 1:26. So I think this is when I first got on, maybe.
Okay, so let me make that full screen. Can you see it? Okay. And let me just, because I kind of looked at this on my phone, but I couldn't see it very well on my phone. But what I like is he looks really willing to work with you. He looks like he's easily going forward. I like that he's lengthening his neck. His ears are back on you in a very positive way, really listening. and he's pretty darn steady. So how much have you ridden him before this video?
We took this twice.
Okay, so this is
But only
lovely.
for like 5 minutes, because he's very opinionated. I tack him up at Liberty, and if he walks away, it's like, but he's been staying and he's had a real good attitude. So I check him out before I get on him for sure.
Yeah, and that's exactly the way to work with a horse that has the defensive pattern we discussed. And so he's 100% working with you, and his balance actually looks pretty good. How does he feel to ride?
He feels really good. Yeah.
So would you say it doesn't look like he's rocking the saddle a lot until you start to ask for halt?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let me replay that one more time.
Oh, you know what? That's the end. That's the end, because I dropped the whip. I was getting.
Oh, so this is the second video.
This is the end.
Okay.
Yeah, this is the it's all the same day, but this is the end because I threw the whip down. That's right.
Okay, so let me pull up the other video really quick. So this is the beginning of the ride.
Yeah.
Because I was like, man, that just looked lovely. The short video, 1:26.
Well, there was another 5-minute one, I think, but I just wanted to get something to you so I could.
Yeah, so this one is about 5.5 minutes, and it looks more like the beginning of your ride because he's not quite as smooth. He's not walking with as much fluidity as he was in the other video we just looked at. He looks a little bit stiffer through the hind legs, but not bad. Yeah, so like the first objective I look at with most horses is, are they resorting to extension in some variation, right? You can have high-headed or low-headed dropping of the back. I don't see that at all. I don't even see him try to get there, other than a tiny bit at the halt in the other video. So once they're out of extension and they're not really pushing the back down, he should feel like he's pretty stable, not really rocking the saddle left to right. But do you feel any excess upward force on one seat bone or the other, or do you feel like it's easy for you to sit level?
It's very difficult. I shattered my right tibia back in 2004, and I still have a tendency to guard it, and I'm pretty crooked. I collapse on the right hip, so I really have to focus on trying to stay stable and level.
Okay, and what would help you with that is if you, because you're such a lovely and quiet rider, and I'm just going to freeze it here, where do you see how you're you're not really behind the vertical, but your legs are not really underneath you either.
Yeah.
Do you see that? So you have these amazing long legs. I would say you might be more comfortable if you took your stirrups down a hole or two.
Okay.
And then if we look at where I froze the video, you're very straight through your seat bones, your pelvis, it tips back a hair, but not very much. And I think if you, like here at the upper wall of the abdomen is where it's a tiny bit collapsed. Do you see that? And part of that could be because your stirrups are short enough that they're kind of pushing you backwards. You could go down a hole and probably feel like you could straighten up this alignment between your seat bones and your head a little bit.
Okay.
So
that's a good idea.
Yeah, if you come forward just a hair on your seat bones, use a little bit of glute muscle to just come a hair off the seat bones. But more importantly, think of your the upper part of your rib cage at the base of your sternum, right here, like under where our bra strap is. You want that solar plexus area to push more forward.
Okay.
And when you push that forward, you still want this nice soft chest that you have with the sternum sort of hanging down. But when you lift a little bit through the solar plexus, it will put your shoulders back just a little bit more over your hip joint.
Okay.
Okay. And then if you take the stirrups down a hole or two, you should be able, like, here's the middle of your foot, and it's just a tiny bit in front of the center of your seat bones.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't bring the seat bones very far forward. And I think if you expand forward through the solar plexus, you'll be forward enough on your seat bones. And, but the leg could come just a tiny bit more underneath you.
You know, that's a good observation, because when I look down and if my toe's in front of my knee, I know my leg is too far forward, the lower leg.
Right. And if you look down from here, you would see your toes.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And so what I think is the stirrup length is putting you a tiny bit backwards.
Okay.
And so play with one hole to, if he's just walking for now, go down, try 2 holes. If you're going to trot him, maybe go back up a hole. But
yeah, we're trotting.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So
at the very end.
So take it down one hole at a time and see if that makes it easier, because here you've got more contact with your lower inner thigh than you have with your upper inner thigh.
Yeah.
And so if you straighten up through your upper trunk just a little at the upper abdominal wall and get your legs underneath you, you might find that the stirrups suddenly feel too short. But what you're looking for is that the contact with the saddle, when you straighten the torso and you have the right stirrup length, on the innermost part of this part of your thigh, sort of the inner upper thigh, is where it will feel like it naturally closes in a little bit, like a gentle clothespin. And this part just above the knee will naturally open out just a hair. And right now it's reversed. You have a little bit too little contact in the upper thigh and a little bit too much contact with the lower thigh.
Yeah.
And so for his back issues, and he looks like he's very ready to either work on more engagement of the hindquarter and or a little bit more lift of the back. So that's where adjusting your position will pay big dividends.
Yeah, that's why I didn't want to do too much more riding before you had a chance to take a look at him and me, and give some more direction, because I think he's ready.
Yeah, I do too. And with the leg injury, sort of knowing that your perception is a little bit off, perhaps, what I do is I look down at the top of my thighs, left and right. And so if I'm vertical in my torso and really balanced over my seat bones, the way I know I'm there is my upper inner thigh gently closes and my knees gently open out, and I don't see my toes.
Right.
And then if I'm not sure about my left-right balance, I'll look down and I'll just see the top of my thighs to my knees. And so you can kind of compare this line to the same line on the other leg. And so part of, like, if we're riding a crooked horse and if we have our own patterns of crookedness, if you're truly straight over gravity, both legs will land at exactly the same spot on the saddle and they'll look symmetrical.
Right.
So we can tell if our bones are symmetrical. And with my own patterns of crookedness, when I first started doing that, my brain was screaming, that can't be straight. But I'd look down at my thighs like every 3 strides and go, no, that's where I need to be. This is where my legs are actually equal to each other. So that might help if you're unsure about how the, tibia fracture affects your perception of balance. That's like a tangible way to look at ourselves during the ride and find our own balance left to right without question. is just look down at your own thighs, and they should be laying symmetrically at the same angle and look the same length.
Right.
From the saddle.
Yeah, those are all good suggestions, because I really struggle with that. I've got a lot of nerve damage below my knee.
Yeah.
So, there's a lot loss of sensation both in my ankle and in my lower leg. So yeah, those are good. Those are good.
So don't count on it. I would put your point of reference higher. So I think did you see the meeting where I was talking about the tree image?
Oh yeah.
As a rider? Okay. So this is where, if we think of it as the tree image, you have a little bit too much energy in the branches. And I would bring that energy into the trunk. And that's what I mean is the very upper front part of your trunk is a tiny bit collapsed.
Mm-hmm.
So your back is overworking a little. You have a lovely straight back. Like that's the part I don't want to disturb. Right? It's more about rounding out the front half of your torso or your trunk.
Mm-hmm.
And that itself will put you a hair more forward on your seat bones. And then I would pay attention to where the contact is naturally happening between the upper and lower parts of the inner thigh.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then look at your thighs. I go, we don't have to rely on what we feel, because we all have a little bit of a debauched sense of balance. So I like those visual aids that I go, it's not an opinion anymore. It's just where my body is over gravity.
Yeah, and when when I have such a crooked pattern, it's I have to go to the visual.
Yeah.
And check it out, because like you said, the brain goes, no, it shouldn't be there. It's like, oh yes, it should. It should be over.
Right. And there's something about your riding that I think is amazing and wonderful, is that you're so communicative as a rider that it doesn't matter if there's little anomalies here and there. You are communicating with him so beautifully. And that to me is the most important part. You're feeling the forces of motion. You're balancing yourself. You're balancing the horse. Even if there's the improvements we're talking about in your riding alignment are just going to help that feel easier and help you have more clarity of what his movement is doing stride by stride.
Mm-hmm.
But you have a lot of receptivity through your body, like you listen to him really well and you adjust to him very well. But do you see how that little bit of a collapse at the solar plexus and the stirrup length is what puts you a tiny bit behind the vertical, where you're not going to get accurate feedback from his movement. It puts you.
I see that right hip.
It's
collapsing again.
Right. And if you look at yourself on video, if you're checking yourself on video, you should look like you're standing over the horse rather than sitting.
Yeah.
And so there's a little sense of sitting more than standing. Right. And that's why I'm thinking it's really the stirrup length that's putting you there more than your own balance. Mm-hmm. You're compensating for feeling a little bit jammed up upward through the leg. And it's not a bad leg length. I just think it's having the effect of sending you a little bit back into a sitting position.
Mm-hmm. Well, one thing that I'm glad to see is that, prior, I was so off balance and collapsed on that right hip that my right stirrup would be so much longer than the left. So that's
great. Great. No, you do a very good job. And it's a good example. Your riding is a very good example that force management is way more important than the accuracy of a posture or even an alignment, because he's really communicating back to you. But to take his balance higher, that's where we make the small adjustments in our own riding that make a bigger difference. And I see what you mean on that left turn. There's a little tendency for you to fall to the right.
Yep.
Let me go back.
Yep. And you can see the stirrup get longer in that one stride.
Yeah. So it's a double whammy, because his balance may also be on the turn. So let's break that down a tiny bit. His balance on the turn, if we watch the top of his pelvis and we watch the back of the saddle, let's just see what his body is doing on the turn. Okay, so it's not huge, but there's a tiny bit of a, let me go back just a step. There's a tiny bit of him hiking up the inside hip. And when he does that, don't look at yourself the first time. Just look at the top of his pelvis and the back of the saddle. So on the turn, do you see what I mean? That the inside hip is a little higher?
Yeah.
On that turn. Yep. Okay, so inside his body, he could be having a little moment of inverted rotation. So inverted rotation means instead of properly laterally bending on the turn or staying straight and properly adducting, abducting on the turn, he's rolling his barrel a little bit to the outside of the turn. So the dorsal tips of the spine are going a little to the outside where they should remain upright. And it's a double whammy between the two of you, because if you know your pattern was to collapse on the right hip, then your body weight is going to go the same direction his body weight is going.
Yeah.
Which adds to his problem, which also adds to your problem.
Right.
Right. So let me go back a little. So what you can do is like right there when you're looking down, that's exactly what I would do to look at the tops of my thighs. Okay. And what you're going to feel is that your brain is going to tell you that you're falling off to the left. But what you want to do is, instead of trying to just put body weight to the left, what I do is pick up the middle of my two seat bones and place it on the left side of the saddle. So not only does that put my body back in alignment straight over gravity on a crooked horse, but it helps me keep my body weight to the left where he's going to be pushing up against you.
You know, and I think I've set him up for that too, because what was going through my head was when we were talking in one of the lessons meetings about doing a circle on straight lines and not more encouraging him to stay straight rather than getting any bend at all. And maybe I'm asking too much that way.
No, because like on green horses, it's really normal for a green horse when you go around a turn or a circle for them to roll the barrel to the outside. They all do that. And it's normal if they're not engaged, if they're a little bit on the forehand. And it can also be a pattern that maybe the horse keeps the dorsal tips to the right, whether he goes left or right. So what he needs to learn through the tight turn is the straight neck, the straight spine, and the level pelvis. The only way to turn with the spine in that alignment is by widening the legs and taking a slight lateral step in adduction and abduction. If he's tight in that lateral movement of the legs, then he'll roll the barrel for that reason too, which is what I suspect.
You know, I wish I had a front shot of him coming around, because when we were tracking right, I slowed it down and looked at it step by step, and I think it's on this one, but we are tracking right. So, and we were coming towards the camera this way, and I was watching the abduction on the left, on the outside left, and then the adduction on the right front. And I thought, oh, I think that's the way it's supposed to be.
Yeah. So we'll look at his legs. We'll replay this a couple times and look at his legs. But no matter why he does it, and he doesn't do it a lot, I have a feeling it's kind of a combination between the two of you, that your pattern exaggerates his pattern and his pattern exaggerates your pattern.
Yeah.
So the only thing you can do as a rider is prepare for the turn, sort of watching your thighs and being willing to sit what feels like way too far to the left on a left turn. But if you look at your own thighs, you'll see that even if it feels like you're falling off the left side of the saddle, you might be straight.
Okay, so move my left seat bone over to the left then.
Yeah. And what I think of is like if we're sitting straight in the saddle, our seat bones straddle a line that goes right through the center of the saddle. Right. But if you imagine, there's also two parallel lines, a couple inches to the right and a couple inches to the left. If I need to correct myself, or if I have a horse that's really exaggerated with this problem and I have to correct, especially my size on a big horse, I use this strategy all the time. I sort of pick up my center and straddle the left line of the saddle rather than trying to stay in the middle of the saddle and just shift my weight left.
Yeah.
That's not always effective, and it can cause us to get more crooked in the opposite direction. So I try to keep my spine straight, keep my vertical alignment, and literally just pick up my two seat bones and think about sitting on the left rail of the saddle, like over the left panel or over the left side of the tree, rather than in the middle. And that's a lot less effort than trying to either use your body weight or push against the upward force of the horse.
Right. So move over towards the stirrup bar then, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And so that's what I would do with your body on every left turn, just to check it out, because you know it's a known pattern. And here is where the shift starts. You see that?
Right there.
So yeah.
Oh,
so it's a tiny, it's not much higher on the left hip. So that tells me it's a combination between you and him, because he's taking the saddle and you're starting to take the saddle over to the right. That's what happens with inverted rotation.
And my right hip's collapsing there too.
Right. And so you see your rib cage is starting to bend a little. And so that's what happens if we put effort into trying to keep our weight equal or keep our weight to the left, is we'll tend to like a rotation problem in the horse creates lateral bending problems in the rider.
Well, and it's interesting to me too that I'm looking at my shoulders there, and as unlevel as my seat is, that my shoulders are still fairly level. That's weird.
Yeah, it's the left shoulder is a little lower.
Yeah.
It's hard to see in this particular frame, but your head is straight, but your left shoulder is a little bit lower. Your right shoulder is more forward. So you're a tiny bit like bent through the left side of your rib cage. But because the front of your rib cage is a tiny bit collapsed, you don't notice it. You don't notice the left lateral bending that's happening in your body. Ah, there we go. And I think because he was a little crooked on the left turn, when you asked for the trot, and let me go back to that little bit.
He pops his head always when we transition up. Right,
which is a natural reflex. It's an instinctual response to going into trot when he's not well balanced.
Right.
Right. So he's just resorting to extension a little bit for the transition. But there in the walk before the transition, he heard your request and answered it with extension and then went into the trot. So that would be where you could interrupt the extension with a little bit more inside or outside bend while you're asking for the trot. Or you could ask for the trot on a little bit of a tighter turn where you might get a deeper placement of the inside hind leg, which might help him push off better.
Right.
he doesn't really come out of extension during the trot.
No.
So that's where I would not keep him straight. Like if I try for a lap or two, or even a half a lap of keeping the neck straight in order to get him out of extension, if it's not working quickly, it's probably not going to work.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So he really didn't come out of extension for the whole trot. So what that tells me is you're going to have to do more than keep him straight or stable through the midline to get him out of extension during that speed.
Right.
So did you see the last couple of meetings where we were talking about the placement of the hind leg and how to use the bend or the turn to get more engagement?
I was in and out Monday, so I heard part of it.
Okay, well, it's up on the group thing. You can review that meeting a little bit. That's how I would address the walk to trot transition. And then during the trot, I would just, instead of following the rail and trying to go straight, I would do like a figure eight or a little circle and then straight, and then another little circle and then straight. Like I would use turning with or without a light bend of the neck. Doesn't matter if the bend of the neck is in the direction of travel or away from it. You're just trying to make, when we bend the neck, and not necessarily asking for a correct lateral bend. So he'll probably give you a little bit of inverted rotation, which means you'll have to sit to the inside at the trot. But it makes pushing the back down more difficult. So if they have a tendency in the trot, when you add speed, he goes, okay, I can do it, but only if I push my back down and shorten my neck. So you don't have to fix it immediately, but you make that use of the spine and the neck difficult the more you turn and or the more you bend the neck. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So at the walk, I wouldn't do it. At the walk, you might play to get more engagement and maintain the straightness you have to get him. You have a pretty good walk, right? But on the turns is where he shows the lack of engagement by going into inverted rotation. And actually, that turn there was about the degree that challenged him. So let me go back to that because that's about the tightest turn you do on the video. This tight turn, and I'll go over turns with you a lot in this lesson only because that's going to be the key to getting more weight off his front end and getting more engagement without him getting more resistant.
Okay.
Okay, because turns, if we turn with the spine straight, we're asking them to move the legs into more adduction and abduction, which has the effect of lengthening the stride. So on the hind leg, on a tight turn, the inside hind is going to adduct or have to adduct more than on a straight line, which increases the length of stride going towards the center of the body. Same thing happens if we bend the neck on a tight turn. The difference is if the spine is straight on a tight turn, you get the adduction of the inside hind leg with the leg landing pretty straight vertically, which is safer. If we have to bend the neck to deepen the placement of the hind leg, then we don't want to keep it there very long because the leg in that sort of dynamic causing of increased adduction, the leg is also going to land oblique. It's not going to be straight. So it's only useful, any bending of the neck is only useful to, number one, make extension of the spine uncomfortable, so they look for something different. And number two, help them discover that they could place their hind leg farther forward than they think. But you don't want to stay there because the angle of the leg is oblique and the bending of the neck not only makes extension uncomfortable, but also makes lifting the back uncomfortable and impossible.
So that right hind looks oblique right now, placed directly behind the left fore, it looks like.
Right. And you have a tiny bit of bend of the neck.
Right.
This is where I would have you straighten out your head when you're making a turn. And I'll go over this, what it should feel like in your body. But as soon as we turn our heads that much, we literally disconnect from the feeling that we're getting in our pelvis. We can't feel what the horse is doing in that moment because we turn the head farther than we turn the pelvis.
Okay.
So a good thing to remember on turns to balance the turn is you want your head straight, not only over your pelvis front to back, but you want to line your line of vision should be between the horse's ears.
Okay.
And that way you're really turning from the saddle and not through the neck. And even if you need to bend the neck, you're going to feel what happens to the back if you're looking straight forward over his ears when you do that.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Okay. So I was thinking about showing you this little example, but I don't think I will. I think if you look straight and pretend like you're walking the turn yourself, rather than thinking of guiding the horse on the turn, imagine like if you walked that turn on the ground and you weren't on a horse, I doubt you would turn your head that much. You would turn your whole body more cohesively.
Right.
Right. So I tell riders, I go, just imagine that you're walking the turn. And that way you end up staying straighter and you can feel through your seat all the little things the horse is doing, gaining and losing his balance during the turn.
Well, and the visual that I've used, I did obviously didn't use it there, was connection between nose, sternum, belly button,
Yes.
so that they stay in alignment with each other as you make that turn. So this is really helpful because obviously, I've heard that, and that's what I need to be doing. But yeah, it's just really helpful to go through it.
No, and I was trained as a jump rider. I mean, I came up as a kid and a teenager as a jump rider. And so I do the same damn thing all the time.
Guys looking for the next fence.
Right. And and it's so ingrained in us. Look where you're going, look where you're going, you know. But if what I had to do was give myself a focus, which was the outside ear of the horse.
Okay.
And that's what finally retrained me to keep my head straight during a turn was I have to be looking at the outside ear of the horse during the turn. And it's outside things like that that get us over our internal habits that we're not even aware of. Because if we're trying to do an internal inventory, sometimes our nervous system is less than helpful. So I like an external visual focus that's reliable, which for me was the outside ear of the horse, or looking between the ears to my path of travel, like it's a little sight, like I'm finding my path between the ears of the horse.
Right.
And that it was what I had to do to train myself to keep my head straight, because that was a big problem for me. It was deeply ingrained. So now as we watch him come around the turn, let me back it up just a little. As we watch him come through this turn, this degree of tightness challenges him just enough to get him to engage his hind end better than what he was doing on a straight line. And so let me try to get us out of the way here. So let's watch it play through. As you tighten this turn, there's the inside hind leg. You see that? It comes deeper under, but the leg is landing a little bit oblique, which is fine. And then you're not really taking a lot of bend of the neck yet. He's following your seat pretty well. So I don't think you're going to need to bend the neck to get the turn. I think you can work on getting tighter and tighter turns with a straight neck, which is a little bit more ideal than having to bend the neck. So here on the turn, just here is where he starts to, I like the width between his hind legs. Here's the braking phase of the right hind and the pushing phase of the left hind. And they look pretty equal. And I might have to play it in real time because what I noticed was just there was a moment. You see where he hesitated, almost like he was going to halt?
Yeah.
That was him having enough adduction in the placement of the hind leg that he instantly felt what the muscle use of braking. So the braking is a phase of every stride from the forward landing of the hoof to peak vertical. But braking also describes the muscle use of the back and hindquarter in resisting their own body weight from falling forward or resisting forward motion, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even though you have him long and level, too much of his weight is still on his front legs, right? So he doesn't control his own body weight as well as he needs to. And when we looked at the last video, he doesn't respond well to a lot of rein resistance. You can give some, but it put him back in extension more often than it encouraged him into balance. So instead of increasing rein resistance to slow him down and get the braking, the turn is a substitute for that, where you don't have to really increase the rein resistance a lot. You can use the turn, which gives you a deeper braking placement of the inside hind, but also they have to figure out, how do I use my braking muscles once my leg is in the right place?
Right.
Does that make sense?
Uh-huh.
So the placement we can help them with by asking them for a turn or by bending the neck. The braking use of the muscle is the beginning. It's half of the equation of them lifting the back. So it's the beginning of them learning to control their own body weight in forward motion and learning to lift the back. That's the importance of understanding that whole braking, pushing mechanism. So as we watch him come through here.
You hold one sec. It's
sure.
Probably the contractor.
Yep. Okay, we're back. Let me share the screen again. Okay, so we're back where we left off. And I'm just going to hit play. And so I'm going to let it play through. And I'll just say now, because it's only really one stride, maybe two. So I'm just going to say now, when I see him figure out the braking muscle use. Now, 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 and gone. But do you see that hesitation in the step?
Yeah.
That's what you're looking for. That's the beginning of him controlling his body weight. And in watching through the whole video, on that tight of a turn was where I saw him figure it out for himself. There, he gets a little moment that's better through the turn. As soon as he starts to go straight, he sort of just gets heavier and heavier on the front end. Mm-hmm. Do you see that?
Yep.
Okay. So classically, you use your back to resist in an upward and downward direction, and you shorten the reins and resist him falling forward through the reins until he figures out how to lift his back. That's the front door, the classic front door to lifting the back and getting more engagement. The back door, which is a little more creative, is just using turns to increase adduction and playing with turns with or without a bend of the neck in order to help them discover more engagement, one hind leg at a time if needed, and how to use the braking muscles in their back and hindquarter. Two doors, one's the back door, one's the front door. That's the only difference. And with his personality and history, I would say the classic door is going to be tricky for him. I would use the back door to the same place.
Yes.
So what the back door entails is as you get a little more vertical and you check yourself left to right, that's really the key to using turns successfully to get engagement, is we have to be vertical and we have to be stable left to right in order to resist those losses of straightness during the turn. And I mean that more in the back than I do the neck, because if we bend the neck, we know we're creating a problem in the back. But sometimes the bending of the neck only helps us with a deeper adduction of the inside hind leg for a step or two, not more than that. Then you let him fall forward. You do a turn the other way if you have to bend the neck, get a step or two on the other hind leg, straighten the neck, let him fall forward, and repeat. Does that make sense? Okay.
Yeah.
Because even though we're, disengaging, so to speak, by bending the neck, he's disengaged in a backwards direction. And so even disengaging him in a forward adduction of the inside hind can be useful. It's not perfect, it's just useful. So, and that's what he's going to need to get from walk to trot. And in the trot, if you put him on a turn or bent the neck on a straight line, he probably might, he might not keep the trot. He might break to the walk. But I would repeat the transitions sort of, if you're on the line you're on in this video, you would have to do it maybe playing with outside bend or inside bend of the neck. If you wanted to keep the neck straight, you would have to spiral in on a circle, coming in tighter and tighter until you started to find the degree of the turn that gets him to lengthen his neck. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So what you're saying is that if it's a tighter turn, there's more of a potential for him to.
The tighter the turn, the harder it is for them to stay in extension.
Okay. Yeah.
Right. So either a straighter line with a bend of the neck is going to make it difficult for him to keep pushing his back down.
Okay.
Or a very tight turn with a straight neck kind of has the same effect.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. And that would be important between the walk to trot transition, the trot to walk transition, and it looks like during the trot. Because once he gets there, he kind of stays there.
Right.
So theoretically, one way out of extension is to straighten and stabilize the alignment of the spine and control the rotation. That's sort of the minimal amount we can do to encourage them to come out of dropping their back and start to lengthen the top line muscles. They might fall forward or they might lift their back from there, but that's the softest, gentlest way to get a horse out of extension. If that doesn't work, we go to the next strategy, which is a little bit or a lot of either bending the neck while traveling a straight line or straightening the neck and making tighter and tighter turns. If either one of those strategies still doesn't work, we have the extreme strategy of bend the neck on a tight turn, and it's going to happen for a step or two. But that's a pretty extreme correction. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So we try to start with the easiest, which is what you're doing in this video. You're just trying to keep the neck straight. You're trying to control your body with the rotation while he's trotting. But the fact that he trots a couple of laps like that just shows you it's not enough for him right now. I'm trying to think when you did that. So what I feel when I ride is if the horse isn't coming out of extension with my first gentlest strategy, by the count of 10, I start to move into the next strategy. And I give that to about the count of 10, right? And if that's not working, I start to go towards another strategy and give it the count of 10. So I'm not letting them get stuck in extension. but I'm not just immediately going to the most extreme correction I have in my pocket.
Right.
I'm sort of seeing how much do I need to influence. Did I miss the trot?
It's at the very end. Probably right about there.
Oh, there. Okay. And I keep moving our little window around, trying to get out of the way here. So here, just he feels your leg. He feels you asking for trot. And he kind of shortens his neck and puts it up, which tells you he hears you and he's going to answer the best way he can, working cooperatively. He's going to push his back down and shorten his neck and use instinct to get the job done. So in that moment, if he does that as soon as I'm asking for trot, then that would tell me ask for trot on a turn. Or if I'm going to stay on this path, because he doesn't have a lot of forward, so you might have to stay straight in order to encourage him to trot and be more forward. The straight lines help with that. But you would have to bend his neck enough that he struggles to stay in extension, that he struggles to stay in this posture during the trot. And typically what will happen is when you bend the neck to the inside during the trot, if you stay on the same path of travel, he's either going to speed up or slow down, lose the trot, or he's going to kind of get more and more uncomfortable and then suddenly pull downward and fall into long and low. That's the typical response if you're making extension uncomfortable. Does that make sense?
Uh-huh. Yep.
But he kind of goes into extension and he's not happy about it. He's not really comfortable, but he goes, this is how I do it. This is manageable. I like my rider, so I'll just get on with it. But he's a little stuck there, which is why you don't get a lot of thrusting or pushing in the trot. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Because whenever they put the neck up and the back down, they're also rotating the pelvis backwards, disengaging, putting the hind legs too far behind.
I think habitually that goes back to when I was doing Jean-Luc's course, and everything was so slowed down because he will pick up the pace, but I think he's just not sure.
Okay.
If I want more.
And that's one of the tricky parts about talking about balance in terms of speed, because, and you and I have worked together with several of the same mentors.
Yeah.
And so in competitive dressage or jumping, we are given the impression that faster equals better.
Right.
And then we meet people like Gavin and Annabelle or Carol or Jean-Luc who are saying, no, we need more braking, which is correct, right? We need more braking to get engagement because that's the braking phase of the stride. And that's how they develop control over their body weight. But I think all three gave me the impression, maybe you too, that slower equals better. And so what I ended up doing with my horses, thinking slower equals better, that slower meant I was increasing braking, my very clever horses just reduced the pushing, but they never increased the braking.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's kind of like, I think Carol used the analogy where we were walking a pole where you can either fly across it and get across it without falling off, but you're not balanced, or you can walk it slowly and use your body's neurological feedback to look at the branches of the tree where you need more force on one side than the other so you don't fall off the pole.
Yes, that's exactly right. And Carol's point, along with Gavin and Jean-Luc, what they're really saying is if we put it in terms of what we're talking about, that braking and pushing equalized is what flexes the spine upward. Most horses are coming out of the too fast genre, that the faster you go, the more lift you get. And they proved, all three of them were saying the same thing. That's not mechanically accurate. That's not how it works, right? So what they're trying to communicate to us was we have to increase the braking or the self-control over forward motion, which is what is half of the lifting effect. But it kind of gave the impression that slower meant I was getting more collected. And sometimes a very clever horse, which is what your horse is doing, which is what my horse is doing, is they go, well, I'm not going to use more energy to resist the forward. I'm just going to reduce the forward.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. That's him.
Yeah. And that was the same thing I struggled with for years. Oh my God, I was so stuck there. And it was like my Arabian lost all forward. I just go, okay, something's not right because now I have no forward energy. And if there's no forward energy, there's nothing to convert. So they don't have to lift their back. They don't have to work as hard. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. Because he's always been a big challenge about moving forward.
Yes. And that is the part.
Like when I first started.
Go ahead.
When I first started him, it was like riding in reverse, almost slow motion. It was like, I'm going to move, and then I know this is what you want, but this is all I'm going to do.
Yes. And so that what you're describing is the horse thinking backwards against the rider, right, putting no effort into forward motion.
Oh, yeah.
So that's one way that horses protect themselves from us. The other way they protect themselves is using momentum, out of control forward, right? So where he first lacked self-propulsion, he put in a minimal effort. They can bounce into a lack of control over forward motion and use momentum, going faster and faster and faster to try to find stability, but they're out of control. I don't think this horse is going to fall into that scenario. But the tricky part with horses that use a fight defensive pattern or horses that are very clever and protecting their bodies is when you ask them to slow down, they don't resist the acceleration that they have. They just completely reduce the acceleration that they have.
Right.
Right. Mm-hmm. So it's like if we're pushing the brakes in our car at a high speed, we're applying more force to slow the car. Right.
Right.
If we're just sort of taking our foot off the gas pedal, we're letting the car slow down. So the horse's back muscles are like the brakes in the car. We should have enough forward force that we're applying a resistance to that same forward force. That's what creates lift. That's what creates engagement. But he's very clever, like my horse is. He goes, I'm just going to take my foot off the gas pedal and that'll make you happy. Mm-hmm. Right? So in the trot, it could be if you were asking him to slow down, that he did that. And that's why he's in extension. He goes, let me contract my neck a little and my back a little and just reduce the pushing force. But it gives you a more lethargic trot instead of a springy trot.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah.
To get the springy trot, we need equal parts forward and braking that resists forward. So the braking is how they control their own body weight. So that's what we're looking for in the balance of the movement is we want them to thrust their body forward, but at the same time, control their body weight with enough braking that they don't fall on the forehand.
Right.
Right. Yeah. And so you've got to get him with whatever amount he's willing to push on the gas pedal. You want to convert that and not, what do I want to say? That's what I saw in the stride on the tight turn. He didn't slow down the forward energy. That little bit of hesitancy in the step was him converting the forward energy, balancing the forward energy with self-control. So let me play this one more time. And that downward transition was not too bad. So when you are asking, because you certainly have enough straightness and enough suppleness at the walk to play with more engagement, more breaking. So what I would do is at the walk with a straight neck, I would play with spiraling in on a circle until you start to find the arc or the degree of turn where you feel him not fall forward so much.
Right. Yeah.
But without shortening his neck.
Right.
So you don't want him long and low, but you don't want him upside down.
Right.
And what you'll feel is you'll start to feel a clearer, more obvious landing of the hoof on the ground. And at the same time, he'll either slow the speed, try to stop, or you'll feel a lightening of the front end where he's controlling himself just a brief moment.
Right.
And that's the degree of turn that you need to play with the most often. And that's why I sort of talked about your vertical balance and how to check yourself left to right, how to keep your head straight. Because if we lose our balance on the turn, it doesn't work as well. You don't get as much engagement. If we control our balance on the turn, then even if we have to bend the neck of the horse to kind of get the ball rolling, we still get the benefit of using the turn for more engagement.
Right. All right. Well, that's all good stuff.
Yeah. And so I'm trying to think if there, I want to look at that one tight turn you did. I think it's here. Yeah. So this is where you kind of go down, you get off the rail there. There. Do you see that little hesitancy?
Mm-hmm.
That was the moment that because of the turn and you were both relatively straight, he did that sort of what I call happy accident. And we get those just by riding well. We get the next evolution as a happy accident. So let me go back to here and just play. And tell me if you're not clear, if you can't see it.
No, I can see him. Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Because that, and I'm sure you know what it feels like. It almost feels like they stop. Oops, let me go back. There we go. It feels like they're about to stop. And sometimes we're a little too quick with our leg aid. We want to encourage that. And if he comes to a complete stop, okay, give him a leg aid. But those little moments, it's a natural half halt. It's him controlling his body weight just a little bit better because he could engage a little bit better or use his back.
Right.
So that's what that would be the next evolution for the two of you. Because what you have going with the straightness at the walk and finding lengthening of the top line with minimal falling forward, it's a fantastic base to work for. It's something you have to have to go to the next step, and you have it in spades at the walk. So at the walk, I would play with getting more engagement, more lift, more control over his own body weight. And at the trot, you might have to go back to bending a little bit to get him out of extension during the trot transitions and during the trot.
Right. Yep.
Okay.
Right. Yeah,
sounds like your doggies are not happy.
Oh, there's a guy here. But he's
okay. Any other questions, or does that give you enough?
Oh yeah. No, that's just hold on just it felt really pretty good at the walk, like he was relaxed and
yes,
long and level. So, but I didn't want to do too much more at the trot because he was going into extension. I thought, well, you know, I'll just wait till Kirsten looks at it. So no.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So take the balance at the walk higher, and at the trot, just look at how can I use turns, circles, or bending the neck to just discourage extension and let him at least fall into long and low at the trot and go
Right.
from there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. No, that's great.
Excellent. Let me
Yes,
stop.
that's
We can
fun,
stop
yeah.
there.